How's it going, Laser Bruises? I'm Bobby Sixkilla. Welcome back to Choices That Matter, and the sun went out. You guys seem to really like this one. It got quite good reception compared to the other two I put up alongside it, so let's dive back in, shall we? I'd love to see at least how this one run turns out. I thought it'd be a really cool idea maybe if we live streamed it and got people to vote on what choice to pick. I thought that would be a pretty neat way to get everyone involved on picking a story. Anyway, let's carry on from where we were at. I picked up the framed photograph and studied it. It was a photograph of two women, one in her 50s and the other in her 20s. The young woman had short red hair. Oh, we read this one. The photograph was dated only a few months ago. Studying the picture in greater detail, I noted the two women looked similar. They must be related. You think the house of the... Okay, we did that. We were up to this, I think. Etienne said this is a summer home. I studied the map spread across the table. It was an old topological map with a rectangular structure in the middle. It was surrounded by forests, and there was a single road leading out toward the edge of the map. Recognizing the roads and the mountains, it suddenly occurred to me that this was the map of the area around this mansion. There was an X in red ink, about a few hundred feet from the mansion, marking the side of a mountain. On the corner of the map, there was a striking logo made up of a series of concentric rings. 12 round circles were equally placed around the rings. Pattern recognized. Magnesium atom, MG282. What an odd logo to place on a map. What do you think is at X, teacher? I intend to find out. There was nothing else of interest in the room. I found myself incredibly curious about the marked location on the old map. It wasn't too far away. I could probably get there in around 5 minutes, even in the snow. Excited, I memorized the location on the map and left the house via a side door. Teacher, you should stay indoors where it's warmer. X marks the spot, Moti. Before long, I arrived at my destination, a steep white hill, though all I could see was snow in every direction. But as I kept walking toward the side of the snow-clad slope before me, I caught a glimpse of something wooden hiding behind a snow-covered bush. As I walked around the bush, a magnificent oaken door revealed itself. It had an old carving of the solar system on it. My heart pounding with curiosity and excitement, I pushed the door open, revealing a long stone corridor behind it, with torches on the walls every 5 feet. There's nothing on the internet about this structure, teacher. The torches were lit, which meant someone was already inside. As I stepped inside, I examined a large carved symbol to my left. It was a magnesium atom logo again, but this one was taller than I was and was engraved into the wall. I stared down the long stone corridor nervously and started walking down it. Step, step, step. Into the unknown. Oh, that was the end of Arc 2. Jeez, we could have made it. We could have made it in the first one. Us and 26 players have discovered a secret place in Flying Falls. Well, good. We're so unique, aren't we? The imperfect walls of the tunnel were made of very old bricks. They reminded me of medieval dungeons, so much that I half expected to bump into an armoured knight. On the other hand, the torches were made of iron and they reeked of kerosene, clearly a modern construction. Someone had replaced the old wooden torches with these recently. I counted about a few dozen torches by the time I reached the T-junction at the end of the corridor. Teacher, I've lost connection to the cell towers. There is no internet connection down here. I'm not surprised, Moti. We're under a large hill. Both the left and right corridors looked almost identical to the one I just walked through. They too had torches, and their walls were made of the same old bricks. Except if I squinted, I could perceive a slight curve in the left and right corridors. They were curved toward the same direction, away from the entrance I'd come from. Teacher, I've calculated the curvature of the corridor to be a semicircle, with the radius of 80 feet. A semicircle? If I was in a circular corridor, that would mean both corridors would eventually meet. Always go left first. After about a minute down the curved hallway, I came upon a round room about 20 feet in diameter. Unlike the corridors, it was lit by fluorescent floor lamps. It had a couple of steel bunk beds outfitted with soft mattresses and woolen blankets. There were a few small square rooms against a wall, their signs indicating there were toilets and showers. Several of the bunk beds weren't made, and there was luggage at the feet of some of them. Teacher, it appears we're now in the living quarters. Yes, that's obvious. What isn't obvious is who on earth chooses to live in a dungeon. I'm unable to search the internet for the answer, teacher. Don't worry about it, Moti, it's rhetorical. Before long, I was at another intersection. I could either turn right into a corridor or keep going down this curved corridor. Teacher, we have walked a full half circle. I can confirm the radius of the semicircle is indeed 80 feet. So if I keep walking ahead, we'll eventually end up where we started. Yes, teacher, if the corridor continues to curve the same way. Alright, let's turn right. The corridor was very short, barely 15 feet in length. At the end of it was yet another intersection, joining another curved corridor. Something told me this was also circular. Left. Walking down it, I found myself in a small round room about 20 feet in diameter. It had hundreds of old and crumbling books squeezed into the numerous wooden shelves lining the walls. Teacher, these are books on astrophysics and cosmological sciences. The kind of books Professor Sol would have in his house. Soon after exiting the small library, I found yet another library with similar room dimensions. The books in this room cover the topics of quantum electrodynamics and quantum field theory. I'm not even sure what those words mean, Moti. I left the second library and walked down the curved corridor until I came upon an intersection. While glancing down the corridor on my right, I suddenly had a light bulb moment. I recognized the strange shapes of these rooms and corridors. Moti, your internal map of this place. Does it look like the magnesium atom symbol we've been seeing? Wait a moment, teacher. The internal map is complete, but it appears you may be right, teacher. The corridors seem to represent the orbits of the electrons, and the rooms represent the electrons themselves. These people must really like the magnesium atom. If I was right, then there were 3 circular corridors under this hill. The outer one I started in, the middle one I was in now, and the inner circle corridor I had yet to explore. Get to the inner corridor. The corridor led into some sort of physics lab. There were giant coils of thick copper wire set up around the room. I could hear the electricity running through the coils. My hair stood as I approached one of them. On one side of the room, a large set of optical lenses were arranged in a complicated manner, though I had no idea what it was for. On the other side was a small kerosene generator. There was a large whiteboard in the middle of the room displaying mathematical equations I didn't understand. Teacher, these equations are similar to the ones in Professor Sol's basement. Unfortunately, without the internet, I cannot access the relevant research. That's okay, Moti. Come, let's try the inner corridor. Leaving the lab and walking along the inner circular corridor, I found yet another intersection, this one leading off toward the middle of the circle. Teacher, I can hear voices coming from over there. Are you sure? I leaned into the corridor. Moti was right. There were voices down that way. Curious, I started sneaking towards them. It sounded like there were a few men over there, agitated about something. Where are they? Demanded a young man angrily from the shadows. I could make around 4 digits sitting at a large dining table. They're late. 4 figures, sorry, sitting at a large dining table. Maybe they got Susan too, reasoned an older man. We should have been more careful after Sol. I felt my heart skip a beat. They knew Professor Sol too. Did they also know Etienne? Screw them, the younger man snapped. We don't need them. We can do this without Susan and her daughter. You know that isn't true. Susan and her daughter are the most brilliant of us now that Sol is gone. Teacher, do you think they were involved in Professor Sol's murder? Doesn't sound like it. Yes, we can, the young man tried again. We're so close to solving this, I'll kill anyone who gets in my way. I froze. Was it possible he had already killed? Better to stay put. Don't be dramatic, son, said the older man sternly. Talk like that'll only get you in trouble. So what? We've started doing things more aggressively? If we made Sol give us his research while he was still breathing, then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. You have no proof that Sol was hiding research from us. Teacher, it appears they don't have Sol's research either. Proof? Oh, come on. Everyone knows the old fart was holding back something. It was obvious. Doesn't mean Sol found anything out. Are you kidding? You really need to get your eyes checked because... It was an echo of a distant gunshot. It had come from the corridors. When I turned my head back to the others, they were all staring at me, open-mouthed. Uh-oh. Okay, let's not jump to any conclusions here. Before I could say or do anything, a woman's piercing scream shot through the corridors. There was a second gunshot. Glancing back at the panicked and puzzled faces by the dining table, I tried to smile sheepishly. Okay, let's not jump to any conclusions here. The young man suddenly leapt out of his chair. Don't let the punk get away, he shouted and charged towards me. Damn it, turning on my heels, I quickly sprinted down the corridor, making my way towards the middle circular corridor. I could hear the men running after me. Go around the other way and double back to the dining hall. Making the not obvious choice, I darted toward one of the small libraries and pressed my back against the wall quietly. I listened as the lab-coated men ran the other way towards the exit. Teacher, why are the strangers always chasing after us? Shh, Moti, I whispered. When the last of them were gone, I quickly ran to the dining hall, giving it a better look this time. I wasn't the least bit surprised to see the magnesium atom carved into the dining table. The lab-coated men who had been sitting there had been scientists of some kind. Teacher, perhaps we can hide behind the bar before they come back. Okay. Suddenly, the sound of a distant explosion rang out and the entire room shook. Having a bad feeling, I made my way out to the middle corridor, and then the outer corridor. I had to find out what happened. Teacher, please be careful. I will, Moti, I replied as I entered the last corridor, the one leading to the exit. Most of the torches in the corridor had been extinguished. I could see two men up ahead, staring at something on the ground. Quietly inching my way forward to get a better look, I realized what everyone was looking at. There were the bodies of two women, one older and one younger. They'd both been shot. Are they the ones from the picture? The redhead and the older woman? I recognized the woman. They were in the photograph back at the mansion. Teacher, behind you. Before I could turn around, I felt a hand grip my arm roughly and pull me around. What did you do? Demanded the young blonde man. It wasn't me. Let our guest go, son, said the older man just behind him. Our guest was with us when the gunshots happened. We have a bigger problem. Bigger problem? Susan and Chloe are both... The young man couldn't seem to bring himself to say it. Yes, a bigger problem, the old man said, and stepped into the darkness. He lit one of the extinguished torches with his own, revealing the problem he had been referring to. There was a cave-in at the end of the corridor. We were trapped. Suddenly I heard someone coughing and wheezing on the ground. Looking down, I saw the older woman moving. Susan, exclaimed the young man happily. Susan's alive. Teacher, Miss Susan is in dire need of medical attention. Moti was right. Snapping myself out of my daze, I turned toward the four lab-coated men. Any medical doctors here? Before the young man with blonde hair shook his head, now that I was standing before them I could see his features clearly. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and was on the short side. His lab coat looked a size too big for him, and had the magnesium atom logo sewn into the breast pocket. Susan's the surgeon, he replied, indicating the injured woman. His face was contorted in panic. What do we do now? Then he looked at me with suspicion. Wait, who the hell are you? Teacher, I'm still unable to access the cell towers. We're unable to contact anyone outside. Lucky asked a good question, said the older man as he relit the torch nearby. My name's Lewis. Who are you? The gentle older man was bald and he looked to be in his late 50s. He was tall, and even though he wore the same lab coat as the rest, I could tell he had the authority over the others. The four men in lab coats looked at me expectantly, waiting for an answer. A friend of Professor Sol. Now, maybe we should examine the woman first, then we'll do it. Hey, answer my question, demanded the young man. Lucky? Ignoring him, I knelt down by the woman's side. Susan examined her. She had full shoulder-length hair. Her grey curls gently spread over the tiled floor around her head. She seemed to be in her early 50s. Her torso had been shot and it was bleeding profusely. Teacher, I estimate Miss Susan has already lost 20% of her blood. If this number reaches 40, her prognosis will almost certainly be fatal. There wasn't much time. Quickly I removed Susan's scarf from around her neck and pushed it against the bleeding wound. I needed to keep pressure on it. With my other hand, I felt behind her torso looking for an exit wound. No exit wound. The bullet was still in her. I cursed under my breath. She needed a hospital with real surgeons. I glanced toward the cave-in just in front of us. Wrong, Ben. Wrong, Ben. Get us a gurney. Lewis, the older man, announced suddenly. Without any hesitation, the two of the lab coat men turned and ran to the corridor. I know what you're thinking, Lewis said to me, next. But none of us are getting out that way. Are you able to help Susan? Turning back toward the injured woman, I wondered if I really could save her. Gently pressing 2 fingers against her neck, I could feel her rapid heart rate confirming Moti's diagnosis. Despite the pressure I was applying, she was still bleeding. What's her blood type? I don't know her blood type, Lewis said, but I'm O negative, a universal donor. And I'm O positive, added Lucky quickly. I nodded. If I couldn't stop the bleeding completely, maybe I could try getting more blood to buy her some time until she got to an actual hospital? I had a basic idea of how to perform a blood transfusion, but it was all theoretical for me. I'd never once done it nor seen it in person. Susan started coughing suddenly, causing my hand to slip off the wound a little. Susan? The older man knelt down and caressed her cheek. It's me, Lewis. Where's Chloe? She croaked and coughed, looking up at him, her eyes red and watering. She must not have noticed the body of the young woman beside her. Before Lewis could answer, the 2 men, Ben and Wong, came running back with a gurney. Teacher, I believe Miss Chloe is deceased next to Miss Susan. I was glad the injured woman wasn't able to read Moti's insensitive comment on my watch. Let's get you on the gurney, Susan, Lewis said instead of answering her question. Are you ready? I wasn't sure if he was asking Susan or me, but I nodded anyway. With the help of everyone, we lifted the bleeding woman onto the gurney and quickly wheeled her down the corridor before she noticed her daughter's body. Susan moaned in pain as I tried my best to keep pressure on her wound. Soon, we were in a biohazard tent inside one of the labs. Where's Chloe? She asked again, her voice still weak, but slightly stronger than before. Where's my daughter? None of the lab coat men looked Susan in the eye, not even Lewis. A look of realization crossed her face. Oh God. Her voice cracked. She shut her eyes and turned away. I could feel her trembling a little under my hand. I'll get the sedative, Lucky whispered to the older man and ran toward the medicine cabinet. Moments later, he returned with a wrapped syringe. Lewis nodded at first, but then apparently changed his mind at the last second. Wait, we might need Susan awake. She's the only medical doctor here. Are you kidding? Lucky hissed back aghast. She's in no condition to help. The pair started arguing in whispers. If I could hear every word, Susan definitely could too, and I certainly could. As before, the other 2 men, Ben and Wong, were silent, seemingly content to let the other pair make all the decisions. It seems that Miss Lewis and Mr. Lewis and Mr. Lucky rarely agree on anything, teacher. Susan, I need your help to save you. No response. Susan, please, I tried again. I don't know what to... Tell me about the damage, the woman interrupted authoritatively. She glanced over at Lucky. Her eyes were still red and puffy. Young man, get me a mirror. Lucky nodded and ran off. Susan looked at me next, waiting for my reply. Teacher, I estimate a loss of 30% of Miss Susan's blood volume. Abdominal gunshot wound with no exit, I stated my first aid assessment. Estimated a third of blood volume lost. I'm having trouble controlling the bleeding. The woman nodded slightly, her expression intensely focused. So I'm at stage 3 hypovolemic shock. She tilted her head towards Ben. Go to the cabinet on the north wall and bring as many hemostatic gauzes as you can. Nodding, Ben took off, crossing paths with Lucky as the blonde man returned with a small hand mirror. She had Lucky hold up the mirror so she could see her own wound, although it was currently covered by my hand. You, she addressed me. When I say the word, lift your hand. But that would cause Miss Susan to bleed out quicker. Are you sure? I asked, finding myself agreeing with Moti. I can't pack the wound if your hand's in the way, she stated simply. You're packing your own wound? I asked, surprised. Shouldn't I do it instead? Are you a trained surgeon? Susan asked pointedly. No? Then I'll do it myself. Lewis, darling, would you hand me the latex gloves, dear? Is this a good idea, teacher? Miss Susan has lost enough blood to alter her mental state. I have the gauze, announced Ben, as he came back with dozens of plastic packets cradled in his arms. Good, the woman said firmly. Despite the blood loss, her voice was strong. Clean your hands with an antiseptic and open a few of the gauzes. Get ready to hand them to me one at a time. Susan, wait, cut in Lewis. Local anesthesia? We don't have any here, she dismissed tersely. Is everyone ready? We nodded hesitantly. I wasn't ready, but what else could I do? At his signal, I lifted my hand, relieving the pressure on the wound. 2 hours later, I was sitting back against the wall outside the tents. My latex-gloved hands were covered in Susan's blood. Pulling them out, I tossed the gloves aside and rested my head against the wall. Well, Susan was right, teacher. Packing her wound with hemostatic gauzes has stopped the bleeding. She's always been a crazy broad, commented Lewis suddenly, reading Moti over my shoulder. I don't know how she does it. Must have hurt like hell. I turned to him. He seemed to be doing much better now. He had a cotton ball pressed against the inside of his arm. Lewis had volunteered to do a blood transfusion when it became clear Susan needed it, much to her chagrin. We have questions about who you are, but... Lewis glanced toward the inside of the tent. The others were cleaning up the mess. I think we could all use a little break tonight. Nod silently. Feeling the fatigue catching up on me, I cleaned up in one of the showers in the living quarters. We were still trapped in here because of the cave-in at the entrance. I was pretty sure it was caused by an explosive device, which meant someone wanted to bury us under the cell. Who was the target? The lab-coated men? The two women? Me? With all these thoughts still swimming in my head, I crashed on one of the dorm beds and shut my eyes, feeling sleep take over. Good morning, teacher. We still do not have internet. I'm glad you got your priorities straight there, Moti. Yawning, I stretched and sat up, only to be startled by both Lewis and Lucky. They were standing at the foot of my bed. Good timing, remarked the young man. I hope you had a good sleep, Lewis began politely. It's time we get better acquainted. Gathering my composure, I nodded. I agree. Who are you people? Lucky laughed and shook his head. You first. Do you know who shot Susan and Chloe, and why they blew up the entrance? I shook my head. I have no idea, I told them honestly. So they have no idea either. I wondered briefly if it was related to Sol's murder. So you don't know why they're doing this? Asked Lucky again. I don't. Lucky sighed. Fine. Tell us this then. What are you doing here, and how did you find us? I was following leads on Sol's murder. They were silent, waiting for me to continue. Sol was a friend, I said, thinking back to when I first met the professor, and he was also helping me with research relating to the sun going out. Lewis nodded sagely. He told us about that. And he told us about you, added Lucky. He wasn't helping you, you hired him to do it. Doesn't mean he wasn't a friend. How did you end up in Flying Falls? Lewis asked next. Did Sol tell you about us? I shook my head. No, he never told me anything personal. I found his Flying Falls bus ticket after he was murdered, and I wanted to know who he was meeting. Lewis looked contemplative. Oh my god. We did invite him, but he never RSVP'd. His research trunk is here too. Someone moved it after the professor was murdered. They looked at each other in surprise at that. Sol's research is here? Asked Lucky quickly, his eagerness apparent. Where is it? I shrugged, a little taken aback by their reaction. I don't know. Last I saw, someone removed everything from the research trunk. It seemed that the goons and I weren't the only ones interested in Sol's research. The final missing piece of the puzzle, if you will, said Lewis. You explained how you found yourself in Flying Falls, but not how you found us. Nothing got past this guy, it seemed. I told them of the map I found in one of the rooms in the nearby mansion. That's Susan and Chloe's house, they told me, though I'd already guessed that. They discussed everything I'd said among themselves for a bit. They seemed satisfied with my answers. Eventually, Lewis left the room, leaving Lucky and me by ourselves. So who are you people? Lucky started walking out of the living quarters, indicating that I should follow him. Why should we tell you? Can we trust you? Might as well. I already know your secret hideout. My guess is you're some sort of secret scientific group. Lucky nodded as we walked down the corridor towards the caved-in entrance. You're right about us. Are you right about that? Will you expose us? All the torches in the corridor had been relit, it seemed. I'm a private investigator, not a journalist. So you're saying you'll keep our secret as long as no one hires you to find us? Lucky concluded that just as we arrived at the caved-in entrance. And no one will, since no one knows you exist. Chloe's body was covered with a thin sheet. Apart from that, everything was the same as last night. Teacher, the cave-in seems very extensive. We're about 10 feet from the exit. It could take up to a week to dig out. A week? I didn't have time to be trapped for that long. What's your watch telling you? Lucky asked, noticing I was looking at Moti. I showed him Moti's assessment. That's what we thought, Lucky muttered. We can do something about this, right? I asked him. I can't be here for a week. We all have real jobs too, you know, the young man replied unhappily. I want to get out of here as much as you. Can you make something that digs quicker? Like what? Lucky asked. A drill? I don't know. You're the scientist in the lab coat, not me. Lucky looked thoughtful. A drill? You're onto something there. I should be able to fashion something together, and you're going to help me. Come with me. Where are we going? I asked as I followed him. To my physics lab. You might have seen it when you were snooping around. It's the one with the big electrical coils. We walked in silence for a bit. I found myself more and more curious about the scientists. Why were they working in secret? What were you researching in the lab? You wouldn't understand, Lucky dismissed. I wasn't giving up. Are you looking into the sun going out like Sol? Lucky chuckled. Of course not. Don't get me wrong, that's fascinating too, but we're looking at something much more important. I blinked. What could be more important than the sun going out? Why is what we do important to you? Lucky countered. Truthfully, it was because I was curious, because so was my friend, I said instead. Lucky seemed contemplative after that, but he didn't answer my question. Instead, he had me help him gather the supplies he needed to build his drill. I watched silently as Lucky pulled apart a giant coil of wires and attached them to a metal rod. Aethirite, the young man with blonde hair said suddenly. What? Aethirite, he repeated. He seemed unsure about telling me that. That's what we call ourselves. We've been around since the 14th century, studying the ether. Since the 14th century? I know how it sounds, like he snapped defensively. I thought it was crazy at first too. I mean, ether? That's pseudoscience bullshit. I could lose my reputation if people knew. I blinked at his sudden outburst. But I've seen the evidence, he continued. I know it's real, and my experiments are getting really close to being able to prove it to the world. Your experiments? I looked around the lab. The giant coils of wire were supposed to prove the existence of this ether. I'm not a crackpot, like he insisted, noticing my expression. No wonder he didn't want to tell us. Look, forget I told you anything, he said quickly. I need you to get me something. He set his hammer down on the bench and instructed me to retrieve a Bunsen burner from the other lab. I wanted to ask him about this ether, but I could sense he wanted to be left alone. Lewis greeted me as I entered the chemistry lab. I nodded at him and started packing one of the unused Bunsen burners. So, did Lucky tell you anything about us and what we do? He asked curiously. I didn't reply, but he must have caught something on body language. Lewis sighed. He shouldn't have. He had a hard expression on his face. You should know that no one will listen to you if you tell anyone about us. I barely understand any of this myself. I turned to him and crossed my arms. Look, I promise not to tell anyone. Will you tell me what ether is? Lewis assessed me curiously for a minute before nodding sagely, yes, I believe I will. Since Lucky already opened that door, I may as well go through it. Ether is an element that is ever present and ubiquitous all around us, Lewis began. It affects every person in the world in subtle ways. Even right now, it affects how you feel and what you're thinking. It affects my thoughts and feelings? Like a drug? He shook his head. No, it's not chemical, it's more like a resonance. A resonance. Suddenly I understood why the Aetherites operated in secrecy. They were crazy. Excusing myself, I started to make my way back to Lucky, to hand him the Bunsen burner. I should focus on getting out of here. Come in here, dear. I heard a voice calling me from one of the biohazard tents just before I could leave. Peeking inside it, I saw Susan by herself. Well, Susan seems to be doing a lot better this morning, teacher, despite the bullet still lodged in her abdomen. Sit, she gestured at the chair next to her. I shook my head and showed her the Bunsen burner in my hands. I really should get this to Lucky. The boy can wait, dear, Susan insisted. Sit. Unsure what I should do, I obeyed. Do you know why we use the symbol of the magnesium atom on our logo? I shook my head, no. It's because the 14th century noblewoman painted it for the Aetherites of her time. But Susan is lying, teacher. The magnesium atom was first discovered in the 18th century. You're probably thinking that it's impossible, and you'd be right, Susan continued. And yet, a carbon-dated 14th century parchment with that logo exists today, in our possession. That caught my attention. They had physical evidence? I know it's not a fake, because I personally performed the carbon dating when I was recruited 30 years ago. Now how would you explain that, I didn't know how to answer that. There are things in this world you have yet to understand, my dear. Susan shut her eyes. Now please show yourself out, I need to rest. I nodded wordlessly and walked out of the tent. I wasn't sure what to make of all that. It took about a day before the preparations were complete. We were ready to clear the rubble at the entrance. What if it caves in while I'm drilling? Asked Lucky uncertainly. Is this really a good idea? Hand me the drill. Lucky pulled his drill away from me. I can do it, he insisted in annoyance. Just give me some time. After about a minute of waiting, the young man finally stepped toward the rubble with his custom drill. Using the kerosene generator to power the drill, Lucky started disintegrating the rocks in the middle of the rubble. His drill seemed to be working perfectly, because in just a few minutes, Lucky had made a 10-foot-long tunnel in the rubble. Suddenly, sunlight started to spill through the hole made by the drill. Without wasting time, I quickly made my way toward the light and squeezed out through the small hole. The others were doing the same behind me. I inhaled the fresh winter scent of the forest. The sun was high up in the sky, which meant it had been about noon. There was snow under my boots. I was finally free. We have internet again, teacher. I'll get Susan, said Lucky quickly before going back to the hideout. She could finally receive proper medical attention in the hospital and get the bullet removed. Just as I was about to celebrate my freedom, I suddenly had a bad feeling. Looking up at the sky, I saw it. The black spots appearing on the sun, rapidly multiplying like a disease. My breath was caught in my throat. It was happening again. We stood frozen, helpless. In just under 3 seconds, the sun was completely covered by the spots, and the world plunged into complete darkness for the second time. The sun is no longer visible, teacher. Uh-oh. Incredible, remarked Lewis as we stood outside the entrance. The sun really is out again. The others had gone back inside for Susan and Chloe. Incredible, it was pitch black everywhere. So we were both carrying torches. Lewis with his kerosene torch, me with my battery-operated flashlight. I don't mean to sound crass, but events like these are akin to gold mines for us scientists. Everything we've ever understood about science is being undermined by this singular event. Suppose so, I said, slowly, smiling. Professor Sol and Lewis had a lot in common, it seemed. Mr. Lewis is exaggerating, teacher. There are many scientific laws and theories that are still secure despite the sun going out. Yes, Moti. I laughed at Moti's words. After a few minutes of waiting, the others were back. Susan was lying awake on a gurney and Chloe's body was rolled up in a blanket. What's going to happen to her? I asked, and gestured at Chloe. You really want to know? Asked Lucky. We're staging it to look like a mugging. All this to keep the Aetherites a secret. They were being ridiculous, but it wasn't my place to tell them that. Any theories on why the sun's going out? The sun? Lewis seemed surprised by my question. I haven't done any work on that, unfortunately, but one of the Aetherites was working on it. I don't seem to remember who it was. An American, that much I know. You mean Sol, interrupted Lucky. Oh, Lewis said quietly, as if realizing his mistake. Of course. We were just talking about it this morning. I do apologize. That was insensitive of me. That's okay, I said. It's strange, though, said Lucky, looking up at the dark sky. What is? The stars. They look different somehow. Like they're not as bright or something. I looked up at the stars. I wasn't an expert, but maybe Lucky was right. It did look a little dim. I wondered if the stars were also going out like the sun. I'm sorry we can't give you a lift, apologized Lewis, as we walked up to the mansion. The important thing is Susan's getting to the hospital, I said. I'll just call a cab. Take care of yourself, Lewis told me and climbed into his car. Lucky nodded at me before doing the same. He was the last one. You're not going to tell anyone about us, are you? Lewis rolled down the window and asked. No, of course not. They nodded and drove away, leaving me at the front door of the mansion. They might be a little crazy with their ether stuff, but they seem like good people. I could hear wolves howling in the distance. The eerie darkness and the cold winds were making it very uncomfortable outside, so I stepped into the mansion. There you are. Turning toward the voice, I see Etienne striding down the corridor. Where were you? He asked frustratedly. I looked everywhere for you. I thought you were in trouble. The park warden was still here. You were looking for me all night? What? No, it's not like that, Etienne denied, flustered. The police got here last night and we swept the place for evidence. I wasn't waiting up on you or anything. The bags under his eyes suggest Mr. Etienne had very little sleep, teacher. Okay, fine, the young man continued. I was a little worried and stayed around to keep looking after the others left. That's because I still have questions about my dad. I smiled. It's okay, I get it. How are we getting back to town? With a car. A friend of mine lent me his because mine couldn't be repaired, Etienne sighed. It's better than walking, should we go? He nodded and gestured for me to follow. The park warden stiffened as soon as we stepped outside. What time is it? A little past noon, I told him. He stared up at the dark sky. Oh. At that moment I realized that Etienne hadn't known that the sun had went out again. There aren't that many windows in the mansion, I said understandingly. He nodded. There aren't. He led us to a car and opened the driver's seat door. Where were you anyway? You didn't answer me earlier. Alright, we're going to wrap this one up here because we're out of time for today. We're going to keep the secret, obviously, because I said that we would. But we'll continue the story in the next one, I suppose. We didn't even get through a whole chapter. I mean, we ended that last chapter, but, you know. Still interesting. Still don't know where this is going. We've no leads about Professor Sol's murder. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.